and the #1 show of 2016, The Flash, Season 2. As we pick up the action, it's 6 months hence from the end of last season. Barry has abandoned his team to go it alone. In a flashback, we're shown that in order to save Flash from the Singularity, Ronnie Raymond and Dr. Stein become Firestorm. However, despite saving Barry, Ronnie is destroyed, leaving Martin the sole survivor. It seems an odd contrivance designed to give Robbie Amell a hasty exit from the show. He does return for a guest spot later, but his run as Firestorm is over, which is disappointing as I really liked the rapport he had with Victor Garber's Dr. Stein. But more on that later. Flash is due to get the key to the city from Mayor Bellows, but Barry is reluctant as it's really Eddie Thawne's sacrifice that saved the day. The first episode continues to tie up last season's pesky loose ends, when Barry receives Dr. Wells, aka Eobard Thawne's, recorded confession that will finally free his dad from prison. It's actually a touching moment where Barry and Caitlin watch the video together. I've always liked Barry with Caitlin, but that ship has pretty much sailed at this point. Yet again, as in the case of Amell, John Wesley Shipp's Henry Allen is hastily written out of the show, as he cites his presence will hold Barry back from becoming the hero he should be. Eventually, the team reunites to battle a series of metahumans that are doppelgangers from another Earth. To help them understand the situation, enter Jay Garrick, the Flash of Earth 2, who claims a powerful speedster named Zoom has stolen his speed and trapped him on their Earth. Zoom intends to steal Barry's speed and add it to his own. While initially distrustful of Jay, Barry soon takes guidance from him as they plan to take down Zoom. Captain Cold makes his pre-rescue appearance with the Flash. This time, he's working for his ratbag of an old man who put a bomb in his daughter's neck to ensure Cold's cooperation. Despite Cold and Heatwave getting a lot of face time on Legends of Tomorrow, this is the only appearance of Golden Glider this season. She's sorely missed, and I hope that they find a way to incorporate her into the show or any of the DCCW shows next season. Dr. Stein sticks around Star Labs for much of the early half of the season, making up for the temporary lack of a Harrison Wells. He falls ill since apparently he needs to periodically merge with a counterpart as not to explode. And since Ronnie is no longer living, the call goes out to find a replacement. Enter Jefferson Jackson, one-time aspiring football player, now full-time mechanic. The pair don't get too much of a chance for development here, but they are quickly spun off into Legends of Tomorrow. I was a big fan of the Stein-Raymond pairing, but Jax eventually grew on me. His youthful enthusiasm and interaction with Stein is one of Legends of Tomorrow's strong points. Unfortunately, he had to wait for Legends of Tomorrow to get the comic-accurate costume. The mystery of Iris' mom is brought to bear this season. Joe's wife Francine reappears telling them that she's dying from McGregor syndrome. She's an ex-drug abuser and abandoned her family when Iris was young. This storyline could have been a bit overbearing in the wrong hands, such as Arrow, I dare say. But it's played out very naturally here. Everyone acts as you would normally expect that they would, and Jesse and Candace give some very strong performances during the storyline. One of the improvements from last season is with Iris. Last season she was overplayed with very little substance, but here her career is taking off on its own, and she has her own little subplot that's moderately interesting. As for Barry, he meets Joe's new partner, the perennially cute and effervescent Patty Spivot. She's actually a good match with Barry, far better than both Iris and Linda, and it's fun to see them together. Enter Harrison Wells, Earth 2 Harrison Wells to be exact. It's great how they found such a unique way of keeping Tom Cavanaugh on the show. His relationship with Cisco is hilarious, and almost the opposite that it was between Cisco and Thawne. Wells promises to help Barry defeat Zoom, which leads to a conflict between mentors as Jay thinks Barry is unready to take on Zoom, while Harry brands Jay a coward. Jay eventually backs out of the team, which upsets Caitlin most of all, who has become smitten with him in the interim. Cisco's vibe powers come to the surface during the season. Cisco is initially hesitant about using them and keeps them a secret from the team until Harry lets the cat out of the bag. There's some real funny scenes of Cisco trying to vibe from Harry. When he eventually does, it's learned that Zoom is holding Harry's pretty daughter Jessie hostage. Linda Park returns for a fun story arc, as her evil doppelganger, which happens to be Dr. Light, comes to Earth looking to kill the Flash. After she escapes, Linda takes her place in a daring attempt to catch Zoom. The plan doesn't quite work out, and Zoom takes the Flash on in battle for the first time, beating him severely, before parading him around Central City like some kind of a perverse trophy. When Barry wakes up, he finds that he's paralyzed from the waist down. Ironically, this puts him into Wells Thawne's wheelchair. In Shades of Rocky 3, Barry needs to confront his fear of Zoom with the aid of guest-starring John Wesley Shipp. Meanwhile, Grodd returns and kidnaps Caitlin. A brave ruse by Harry impersonating the Reverse Flash, and the Flash's knockout punch sends Grodd to Earth 2's Gorilla City. Then the traditional Yuletide episode marks the return of Mark Hamill as the Trickster. Weather Wizard breaks both he and Captain Cold out of Iron Heights for another shot at the Flash. Cold bows out, preferring to join the crew of the Wave Rider over on Legends of Tomorrow. Meanwhile, Patty tries to kill Weather Wizard in revenge for his murdering her father. The Flash manages to convince her otherwise, and the two rogues are captured and returned to jail. During all this, Iris drops the news that Francine has a son, whom Joe didn't even know he had. Again, this could have been pretty overbearing in the wrong hands, but it's acted and handled extremely well. Enter Wally West, and to be honest, Wally's introduction is one of the season's weaker elements. Wally is pretty much an angry young man who has a giant chip on his shoulder. He's kind of in the mold of Chris O'Donnell's Robin, and I generally like Chris O'Donnell's Robin. Wally has a need for speed and drag races for money to pay his mom's hospital bills. Not unlike Batgirl in Batman and Robin, so there's also that. Eventually, Francine dies off-screen, which seems a little odd to be honest. But it's actually a benefit to not have to wring even more angst out of the show this season than need be. Flash's oldest villain, the Turtle, makes his first and last appearance. Nice to see them making full use of Flash's extensive rogues gallery. And the Turtle is Flash's power opposite, where he can slow the Flash's speed down considerably. Wells ends up killing Turtle, though, in an attempt to steal his power. Kind of a waste of an intriguing villain. Reverse Flash makes a return trip from the future. Turns out he's a Time Remnant. This was another of the weaker elements of the season. The Time Remnant is a bit of a convoluted plot device, but more on that later. Barry sends Thawne back to the future in order to save Cisco from disappearing from existence. These pesky time paradoxes. You never know where they're going to strike, or who. Patty Spivet's chapter closes around here. It's kind of a shame too, as I really grew to like her. They played very heavily into the classic hero motif where Barry struggles to keep his secret while dating her, and spends endless time making up excuses for ditching her to become the Flash. I was glad to see that Barry eventually heeds Wells' advice to keep Patty in the dark for her own safety. Even when Patty eventually decides to leave Central City and pretty much figures out Barry's secret, he keeps his secret to the end. Classic superhero stuff right there. Zoom holds Wells' daughter Jessie prisoner on Earth 2 to ensure his cooperation in stealing the Flash's speed. After initially stealing a small bit of the Flash's speed, Wells comes clean that he has no choice but to betray Barry for the sake of Jessie's safety. Team Flash is not very forgiving of Harry, but I was glad to see that they kept Barry very much in character. He offers to go to Earth 2 to save Jessie and defeat Zoom on his own turf. This leads to one of the most enjoyable arcs of the season where Barry, Harry, and Cisco travel to Earth 2. Barry takes the place of his nerdy doppelganger, and Grant Gustin's performance is hilarious. He's easily the most talented dramatic actor on any of these shows, but he also has a great flair for comedy as well. Everything is topsy-turvy on Earth 2. Joe is a lounge singer while Iris is a cop, and her partner is Deadshot, who humorously couldn't hit a target if it were 2 feet in front of him. Barry meets Earth 2's Caitlin Snow, who just happens to be Killer Frost. You can tell Danielle Panabaker is having a lot of fun with the role, and her appearance is definitely worth the wait. She and her boyfriend Earth 2 Ronnie Raymond, aka Deathstorm, the evil version of Firestorm, are Zoom's enforcers. Another fun bit has Cisco meeting his evil counterpart, Reverb, who is a cold, calculating villain that offers Cisco to join him. As the Flash attempts to save his friends, Deathstorm and Reverb try to kill him. This goes against Zoom's wishes and he kills them both. Robbie Amell gets killed twice this season for those of you keeping score at home. It's more of a waste with Reverb's death, however. I could easily see him as a recurring villain. It seems a recurring theme this season that all the good villains end up getting killed off. Barry is taken prisoner by Zoom and held in the same dungeon as Jessie and a mysterious man in a mask who tries to communicate with them by tapping on the glass of his cell in code. The pair can only get one word from him, however, Jay, as in Jay Garrick. Back on Earth 1, Jay Garrick has returned and is called upon to save Central City in Barry's absence. Caitlin creates Velocity 9, which gives him enough speed to avert certain crises created by Geomancer, who has the power to cause earthquakes. He's a decidedly kooky villain that feels like he was torn straight out of the 90s show, so needless to say, I enjoy the character quite a bit. Back on Earth 2, Cisco succeeds in convincing Killer Frost to lead them to Zoom's lair, where they free Barry and Jesse. Before the Mystery Man can be freed, Zoom returns, and Frost buys them enough time to escape by attacking Zoom. As the group makes their way back through the only remaining portal to Earth 1, Zoom kills Jay. It's not long until Team Flash realize that Zoom was somehow Jay Garrick. While searching for a solution to the problem of defeating Zoom, there are a few filler episodes that have various levels of success. The first of which is the long-awaited return of King Shark, who made a cameo earlier in the season. Lila and Diggle make a welcome guest appearance. The CGI for King Shark is very impressive, and it's a fun little episode. Next up, Flash takes on Trajectory, a female scientist turned thief and thrill seeker who takes Velocity 9 like a junkie. The episode is most notable as Barry wrestles with the temptation to take Velocity 9 himself as a shortcut. This ain't pro sports after all. No performance enhancer testing involved in the superhero gig, but Barry heeds Wells' advice and decides to get faster the old-fashioned way. Meanwhile, Jessie learns her dad killed the turtle and decides to head out on her own. Barry then decides to head back in time to take the place of his past self and ask the advice of the disguised Thawne. I'll take the time now to mention how cool it is to see that Barry has the classic emblem with the white backing on his costume this year. I figured fairly early on the reason for the red emblem last year was so that viewers wouldn't get confused with all the potential time travel shenanigans that were afoot which Flash is which. The episode in question that is relived is the Pied Piper episode of last season. Thawne figures out fairly early on that Barry is from the future since he brought along with him a Time Wraith, which looks like a reject from Raiders of the Lost Ark. Now, along with Angry Young Wally and the Time Remnant concept, this is the third element introduced this season that I'm not too crazy about. Thawne informs that the Time Wraith tries to destroy speedsters that try to disrupt the timeline. It hasn't come after him since he, quote-unquote, knows what he's doing. It's a fairly esoteric concept, and given all the time travel that goes on in The Flash, to say nothing of Legends of Tomorrow, it seems like a hastily thrown-in contrivance. Another thing that bugs me about the episode is just how greatly Barry ends up changing the timeline with no real ramifications. Pied Piper is now a friend of Team Flash due to Barry's interference. This is most disappointing to me since I thought Piper was a brilliant nemesis for Cisco last season. At the very least, it was good to see Eddie again, as Barry spares a few moments to bring Iris back a video he recorded of Eddie during his trip to the past. The season really ramps up for the final stretch as we learn Zoom's backstory. He's a serial killer named Hunter Zolomon, who was traumatized as a child after witnessing his father kill his mother. This really cements Zoom as Barry's dark opposite. They both went through a similar tragedy, only to come out of it to become two very different people. What can I say? I'm a sucker for a dark opposite villain, and Zoom is highly effective in that role. Zoom was able to kill Jay by killing his own Time Remnant, and yes, that still won't be the last time we mention the Time Remnant. Barry and Cisco lure Zoom back to Earth 1 via Cisco's emerging vibe powers. The trap backfires, however, and Zoom holds Wally hostage, offering him in trade for Flash's speed. Barry agrees to this and gives up his powers to Zoom. It sort of echoes the ending of Superman 2 in a way, where the hero appears to be utterly defeated by the villain. Since Superman 2 was one of my favorite films, that's probably another reason why I enjoyed this episode so much. Zoom attempts to kill Barry, but Caitlin's pleas stop Zoom and he captures her, taking her back to his lair on Earth 2. While there, she comes across the imprisoned killer Frost. Frost makes a deal to help her escape once freed. She of course tries to double-cross Caitlin before Zoom reappears, killing Frost. Again, big waste of a cool Earth 2 villain that should have reoccurred several times in the future. Obviously, with the Flashpoint Paradox being a big part of Season 3, I think it's safe to say we'll see Frost again before long, but it's still disappointing. I'm glad Caitlin actually gets a fair bit of focus in this back half of the season. Not unlike Emily Bitt Rickards, Danielle Panabaker is really at her best in the funny, quirky mode, but to her credit, I feel she rises to the occasion here in a fairly dramatic role this season. Barry has trouble adjusting to his loss of powers and has to face a super strong villain named Griffin Grey without his speed. He eventually defeats Grey by making him exert his strength, as the villain ages every time he uses his super strength until he just keels over and dies. In addition to Grey, the Flash seems to kill an inordinate amount of villains this season, starting with Atom Smasher in the first episode, continuing on in the second with Speed Demon. Not for nothing, but Barry's supposed to be the lighthearted superhero. I think he dropped more bodies than Arrow this season. Wells ends up being reunited with Jesse, and Wally becomes inspired by the Flash's great sacrifice on his behalf, becoming a hero in the making. Zoom continues his reign of terror by attempting his takeover of Earth-1. He sends Cisco's brother's doppelganger Rupture. After he fails, Zoom kills several police officers and takes over the Central City Police Station, imprisoning Caitlin there. When all looks dire, Barry brings his dad back to Star Labs, allegedly for good, and Wells tries to convince Barry to allow him to recreate the accident that made him the Flash. It's a very epic moment that is a little nod to the Flashpoint Paradox story. The experiment doesn't go as planned, and Barry is turned into energy that hits Wally and Jesse. Turns out that Barry has gone to the Speed Force, and the Speed Force turns out to be sentient, and takes the form of Barry's loved ones, including his mother. Barry can't receive his powers and return to the real world again unless he catches an elusive shadowy figure that outruns him. Again, this is a fairly esoteric concept that I could do without. This is probably all familiar to comic readers that have closely followed the books for many years, but for me, it's an unnecessary addition, an overall head-scratcher. Eventually, Barry catches the shadowy figure and returns at Iris' behest. And while I really enjoyed Iris this year, this is where they started to lose me with the whole Iris is Barry's destiny business again. I get that Iris was Barry's wife in the comics, but again, their relationship in the show is problematic to say the least. The show tries to have it both ways. On the one hand, they play up Barry and Joe being like father and son, and they're the closest of the close, and don't get me wrong, I love that relationship between them and wouldn't want them to change it. But you can't have Joe as Barry's father and then act like, well, Iris is nothing like a sister to Barry. They obviously aren't related by blood, so it's all good. It just doesn't work that way. Try as they may, the show can't have it both ways. You can't have Joe being Barry's foster father without Iris being his foster sister. It just feels odd playing it the way they are. Anyway, as the season winds down, Katie Cassidy returns, this time as Black Canary's doppelganger, Black Siren. In an amusing gambit, Cisco and Caitlin, who was released by Zoom, take the guise of Reverb and Killer Frost to stall Black Siren off, while Barry uses Wells and Cisco's device that succeeds in rendering all the Earth-2 villains unconscious. Zoom, meanwhile, escapes back to Earth-2. Amanda Pays returns again this season as Tina McGee. It's cool seeing Flash save her again for the first time in years. She's in on the Flash's secret, too, which means hopefully she'll have more regular appearances next season. It was also a treat to have Pays and Ship sharing the screen for the first time in decades as well. There's even a hint of a romance between Henry and Tina. Well, that is until Zoom returns and kills Henry. Yes, tragically, Zoom kills Henry in front of Barry to cement the parallels between them, and to tempt Barry to the dark side to prove he could just as easily have become Zoom. Barry naturally wants to kill Zoom, but Zoom challenges Barry to a race to prove for all time who is the fastest man alive. This really appealed to me. Zoom isn't satisfied to be the ruler of worlds, but he must prove to be the fastest. That's of tantamount importance to him. Zoom does have another motive, however. The race will generate the power for his device to destroy all worlds in the multiverse but Earth-1. Team Flash trap Barry in the pipeline for his own good, fearing revenge will cloud his judgment, and they plan to trap Zoom themselves. Naturally, the plan goes south and Joe is captured. Wally frees Barry, who agrees to the race. In the end, Barry creates a time remnant that frees Joe and destroys Zoom's machine, while the real Barry fights Zoom. Barry's remnant burns himself out, but not before summoning time wraiths that disfigure Zoom and carry him off to who knows where. As almost an afterthought, the mysterious man in the Iron Mask is saved and joins them on Earth-1, where lo and behold, he turns out to be the original Jay Garrick, whom Zoom was impersonating. It was great to see Ship in a Flash suit again. That's probably the closest we'll have of him reprising the role of the Flash. Of course, Jay is the role many of us were hoping he'd play all along, but it was a stroke of genius giving Ship 2 choice roles for the price of 1. Jay takes Harry and Jesse back to Earth-2, and Barry ends the season by going back and preventing his mother's murder, signaling next season's version of the Flashpoint Paradox. In conclusion, I really enjoyed this season, even more than last season, which is no small feat. There were a few speed bumps. Such things like the time wraiths and time remnants were a little too inside baseball for fans like me who are not entirely familiar with the concepts of the comics, but there was so much to enjoy here. Iris being a likable character, Caitlin getting some good character development, Tom Cavanaugh getting to put a new spin on Harrison Wells. His banter with Cisco was a lot of fun. John Wesley Shipp emerging as the Jay Garrick Flash. Joe got a great storyline, and after a rocky start, I really liked the kid that played Wally. Zoom was appropriately menacing and an entertaining villain in his own right, and Barry got put through the emotional ringer. A great season overall. I'm giving The Flash Season 2 5 stars out of 5. Thank you for joining me for this exhaustive rundown of the 2015-2016 season of superhero television, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. This is Johnnie Torch reminding you, keep the flame burning brightly, and I'll be with you again real soon.